Thank you, Mr. Can Dündar. It's a pleasure for us to have you with us here in Brazil. You speaking
Thank
from
you. Pleasure
Germany.
is mine. Thank you so much for your invitation.
Thank you for your time to speak with the Brazilian Senate. As executive editor of Interlegis, the Senate think tank, we would like to thank you very much for your time. So you are in Berlin, right? In
That's
Germany.
right. Yes.
Could you please tell our audience about your work and your background as a journalist, please?
Sure. I've been working as a journalist for the last 40 years now, mostly in Turkey. I worked as a correspondent, as a reporter, as an anchorman, as a columnist, and basically I'm a documentarist in my country. So I made a lot of documentaries. I wrote a lot of books. At the same time, I made my PhD in a Turkish university on state secrets versus press freedom. And for the last 5 years, I've been living in Berlin.
And you were awarded by Reporters Without Borders with a prize for independent and courageous journalism. Could you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, it was a time when I published a very important document in my paper. I used to be the editor-in-chief of the paper called Cumhuriyet, Republic in Turkey, which is the oldest and one of the most prestigious papers in Turkey, 100 years old, an opposition paper, let's say. So when I was an editor-in-chief in that paper, we published a document and some videos showing Turkish intelligence agency smuggling secretly arms through Syria to the radical Islamists there. And the government claimed that that was a state secret. They couldn't deny it, but they said it was a state secret. It shouldn't have revealed. And then they opened a case against me, and they asked 2 life sentences for this one true story. And the government and the prime minister of that time, Erdogan, said the guy who made this story would pay a heavy price for this. I would not let him go. So just after this threat, RSF, Reporters Without Borders, gave me this prize in Strasbourg. So I got it with pleasure and honor.
I see. Regarding that, could you tell us a little bit about the reason of your imprisonment in Turkey? How long you've been in prison for publishing investigative stories as a journalist? And how long you were in jail? Was that a trial? How that work? Was a pressure from the government? How did it work for you?
Well, after I got this award, just after this, I went back to the country and I was arrested right away. And the claim was releasing the state secrets together with trying to topple the government and helping a terrorist organization by publishing the story. And my defense was it was my duty, my responsibility as a journalist to give this information to the public because they were playing with fire. I mean, by sending arms secretly to Syrian radicals. And of course, the public has the right to know this. And it was an illegal transferring because Turkish intelligence service was not it was not their duty to send arms to any organization outside Turkey. But they said as a journalist, if you publish a state secret, which I didn't know that it was a state secret, it was a crime. So they put me in jail and in Istanbul. And this jail is famous because this is the biggest jail for journalists in the world. At that stage, there were something like 150 journalists in that jail, built by Erdogan regime, and there were many writers, journalists in this prison, Silivri, and so I spent 3 months there in solitary confinement. Uh, but then, of course, the pressure was high by the public, and my journalist colleagues were really campaigning outside the jail, and there was a huge discussion in parliament in the country, and thanks to this public awareness, the constitutional court made a decision over our case, and they said this piece is not an act of terrorism but an act of journalism. And Erdogan said, I don't respect this decision, I don't obey this decision, but he had to leave me. And we were released together with a journalist friend. So we were released in 216. And for a while, I was traveling abroad. But after the military coup attempt in that year, 2016, I was in Barcelona when the military coup attempt has happened. The whole regime has changed in Turkey, and there was a kind of one-party system was built up, and the rule of law was lifted. And then my lawyers said, you better stay there in Europe, not, because if you come back, you will spend all your life in jail. So I decided to stay in Europe, and since then I've been living in Germany in exile.
Are there still many journalists in this prison that you
Yes,
mentioned in Turkey?
yes, unfortunately so. The number is changing daily, but it's something like hundreds today. And they have done nothing but just journalism. They are there because of their articles, their comments on TV. Um, Even they tweeted something. Forget about this. I mean, they retweeted something, and there are some people spending months and years in jail just retweeting a tweet.
And President Erdogan raised to power as prime minister in Turkey in 2003 and becoming president in 2014. Would you say that there is a democracy in Turkey? How do you see that?
Unfortunately, Turkish democracy has never been a perfect democracy. You know, from the beginning, there was military coups and bad governments, military governments, etc. So we have never felt that we've been living in a democracy. There has been always problems with press freedom, with rule of law, with constitutional rule, separation of powers, etc. But I guess this period of time is the worst in Turkey's history. At least I witnessed the last 40 years of Turkish history, and I was a journalist during the military coup times in 1980s, and I can easily say that this is the worst time I've ever seen in this country. For journalists, for civil society, for judges, for academics, for business, you can't imagine the pressure over the country and the fear, of course. The fear is there, and people really scared to say anything against this government. So I can't talk about democracy in the country, but there are still resisting people, and thanks to them, there's a kind of tug of war between the democracy forces and the government.
And you also suffered, besides, an assassination attempt. Could you
Yeah.
tell us a little bit about it, please?
Yeah, I mean, the world is full of crazy leaders nowadays, as you see, you know, everywhere. And we have one of them in Turkey. And he showed me as a target, saying that this is the traitor, this is, you know, he betrayed our country, etc. And kind of encouraged people to attack over me. And one day, in fact, it was the day of court case. And just before the court made the decision, I was attacked by a gunman in front of the courthouse, which was the most protected place in Turkey. But he can easily came there and then shot towards me twice. And thanks to my wife's courage, to be honest, you can find the video in the internet. She jumped over the attacker, and then he failed to kill me. And what happened is, in the end, 5 months later, he was released. Uh, and but they took my wife's passport, and they blocked the way we communicate with each other. And we unfortunately we had to stay 3.5 years separated with my wife. And the gunman is now free, and I guess he's a hero. You hear me?
Do you believe you'll be able to live back in Turkey and work as a journalist soon?
Well, the government will be very pleased if I go back to country, because they're ready to arrest me again and put me in jail. So, of course, you can always go back. It means that I will spend most of my life in jail then, till the end of this regime. So I'm afraid it's not a good idea now to go back. And not only being in jail, but I mean, if you're free outside jail, it's impossible to work as a journalist, because there are a lot of journalists now in kind of free, but they're scared, and the writing something against the government has a very high price, unfortunately.
And how do you see the importance of freedom for the press and the relation between a free press and a democracy?
I mean, we can't think of democracy without a free press. You see America nowadays as the, one of the biggest democracies in the world. And if the media is under pressure by the government, we can't talk about a functioning democracy anywhere in the world. So I can't even think of a republic without free press. And if the government is threatening the media, if the judges are kind of fishing for journalists, uh, and if the the ministers, for example, is targeting journalists, it's kind of impossible to inform the public for journalists. And if you want a functioning democracy in the world, we have to protect journalists, to protect the truth. And nowadays, unfortunately, everywhere there's a high price to defend the truth, but we have to defend it, because if we can't defend the truth, and if we can't reveal it, the public would not be aware of the dangers waiting for them. And now I think we have a tug of war between the truth and the lie, and we can't let lie gain this play.
And you also have a brilliant work in documentaries. You produce or write documentary work, and you did with about Ataturk, the founder of a modern republic in Turkey. Could you tell us a little bit more about it? Because you show a different side of this leader, more of a human side of him. Could you tell more about it, please?
Sure, I made this documentary just to present the world how Turkey was built on, and not only this, but to show some personal points of our big hero. We worked a lot on this documentary, and we openly, even the unopened archives of Turkey, and reached a lot of material about Atatürk, and we put them in a documentary, and the result was a success because more than 1,100,000 people watched it. But there has been a huge discussion about the film, not about the film only, but about Atatürk then, because as you know, I mean, heroes are kind of untouchable. So nobody wants to learn about his personal life, or some people doesn't like it, or some points, some people didn't like his personal points or personal memories of his life. So the discussion was there, but I respect Atatürk, and it was 100 years ago he built up this country with a revolution. And now what we are facing now is a kind of counter-revolution. And what Atatürk was built is endangered by Erdogan regime now. So that's why we are on the side of this revolution, because this revolution brought Turkey democracy, rule of law, Western principles, like media freedom, equality of men and women, constitutional democracy, and republican ideas. And in return, what we are facing now is a kind of Sharia law, domination of men, and a repressive government. That's why Turkey is at the edge of a big fight between those two. And we want all the world to support the democracy struggle in Turkey instead of supporting this aggressive government.
Do you see the same thing that is happening with Turkey democracy happening in other countries? Of course, we're seeing what is happening with the riots in the United States. We're seeing different leaders around the world that are very suspicious about their democracy feelings. Do you think that it's going around everywhere, that the world is facing a lack of democracy this time?
Of course, we are all witnessing this failure of democracy in different corners of the world. It's a global illness. So, like coronavirus, it's a kind of oppressive regimes all over the world, and the signs are kind of attacking media, uh, putting pressure over judiciary, using police force, and repressing demonstrations, and lacking power of parliaments and powerful leaders. So those are the signs of this illness. And as long as we are not ready to face with it, or we are not powerful enough to fight against it, they will prevail. That's why, yes, I observe this counter-revolutionary, anti-democratic movements all over the world. And the only solution is the whole democratic forces of the world should come together and resist this development. Otherwise, one by one, it's not easy for us to get rid of those authoritarian regimes.
Thank you, John. It's our pleasure to talk.
Yeah, it was my pleasure. Thank you so much. And please send my message to the Senate and the people who listen to this interview. We need solidarity. We need support to each other. We need to come together to get rid of this aggressive authoritarian regimes and to get back our democracy again.
Thank you so much. And we'll stand together for democracy, for freedom, and for the freedom of the press. And thank you very much for your time. And for us, it's a pleasure to have you here.
My honor. Thank you. All the best. Good. Bye-bye. Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye. Thanks, John.
All the best. Bye-bye.